Okay, I need to start by saying I got a PayPal notification and I was like, what could this be about? And somebody said, thanks for reading. So, if you are the one that sent me a little PayPal for just reading, that was really nice of you. I did not expect that. And I hope that if you're hearing this, no one feels obligated because I'm just doing this for myself to be accountable to finish a long book. So, that was very nice. And I did buy myself flowers, as you can see. So, yeah. Here's Pearl. I had a dinner party last night, and so I kind of, I don't know, I moved around some stuff, like the shelves. I'm kind of into the shelves there. Um, I think I'm gonna keep it there. It's kind of fun. Pearl's good. Pearl had a really fun time. She's so social, and she loved hanging out with the people. Also, I was really ambitious. I over invited because I figured like on a weekend people would bail, but I don't think anyone bailed. I think everyone came, and I only have maybe like 10 chairs in my entire apartment, and so I think 12 people came. So we had to get a little creative. Some people were kneeling, and I felt bad, but oh well. Fun part of the Power Broker. I'm just gonna start page 395. We're one paragraph. Excuse me, the second paragraph of 395. Then Moses turned to the question of transforming Randall's and Ward's Islands into parks. His authority had no authorization from the PWA to build parks. It was true. But he convinced PWA officials that the parks would attract to the islands and to the bridge enough toll-paying motorists to justify a modest investment. And a modest investment was all he had in mind, he told the officials. The authority would have to pay for the materials needed to construct baseball diamonds, tennis courts, and bench-lined esplanades. But the total cost should not be more than $225,000. The big cost involved, that of labor, would be paid for by the CWA, for he would make the reclamation of the islands a park department project. The old authority had planned and had received PWA authorization to build a Randall's Island Municipal Stadium with a seating capacity of 10,000. Wholly inadequate, Moses said. He wanted a stadium seating at least 70,000. That's so big. Big enough to hold an annual interborough athletic competition, the competitors to be champions selected in track meets and other athletic events held in each borough, and the big crowds that he was sure would attend. And he wanted it to be big enough to be the size of Olympic tryouts and great outdoor spectacles. The stadium must be adequate for big events or it is a big failure, he said. There is ample room on the island for a big stadium. Its components must be of commensurate size, he said. For example, it should have the largest movable outdoor stage in the world. Construction of such a stadium would cost the city millions in ordinary times. But now, the labor, the biggest single item, would be paid for by the federal government. He persuaded the CWA to list the stadium as a park department project. $1 million in materials would be needed for these men to work with, but he persuaded the PWA that the stadium would help attract toll payers to the bridge, and the agency allowed the authority to increase its previously authorized contribution by $300K. There was still an obstacle to the creation of parks and a stadium on Randall's and Ward's Islands. The institutional buildings already there. The military hospital was only partly filled, and Moses had little difficulty persuading U.S. Army and Navy officials to move the patients to other hospitals and vacate the buildings. But the House of Refuge, the Hospital for the Feeble-Minded, and Manhattan State Hospital presented a more difficult problem. City and state reformatories and asylums were already overcrowded. LaGuardia's hospital commissioner, Dr. Sigismund S. Goldwater, flatly refused to move patients out of the city buildings on the two islands, and state officials said any moves would have to wait until new state institutions were constructed. But Moses persuaded Lehman to overrule the state officials and LaGuardia to overrule Goldwater, and by the end of 1934, With the patients crammed into overcrowded institutions, the House of Refuge had been vacated and demolished, and the raising of the hospital for the feeble-minded was underway. That happened really quickly, so he just somehow persuaded people. It's hard because I feel like, like based on what we've seen him do with the clearing out the Southern State Parkway land, where he sort of bribed people or did dirty stuff or promised votes or promised that people could have advanced information so that they could buy land and then therefore profit off stuff. Like he was doing all these dirty trades all the time, and so it's hard to like it's very natural to assume that he was probably doing some of that here. Meanwhile, Moses's eyes had focused on the sunken meadow, the 50-acre sandbar east of Randall's Island. The 100-yard strip east of the East River that separated it from the island concealed land that lay only a few feet below the surface. Moses ordered the strip filled in, and Sunken Meadow was thereby made a part of Randall's Island, and another 50 acres was acquired for park space. So he just built land, kind of. The residents of the high-end apartment houses that lined the Manhattan side of the East River had never gotten much of a view for their money. Opposite them, to the east and dragging off to the south, was scenery done in early industrial era Midlands. The grimy warehouses, factories, tenements, oil tanks, and open storage depots of Astoria and Long Island City. Its dreariness broken only by the gaudiness of occasional monster billboards painted large enough so that their messages could be seen clearly across the river. That vista stretched away without a break. There were no housing developments or parks there then. Beneath the pall, the word smog had not yet gained currency, cast over it by belching smokestacks. And the scene to the north, where Ward's Island lay, low in the water with Randall's behind it, had not been any prettier. Dull-colored and lifeless in the distance, even when fog didn't shroud them, the two islands had been adorned only by the squat, red and gray institutional buildings that failed to block out the scenery behind the islands. The South Bronx, Long Island City's spiritual descendant. Since 1932, the piers erected for the first abortive attempt to build the Triborough Bridge had been part of the scene, but dun-colored, featureless, and without a bridge on top of them, seemed in the distance like a succession of walls to play handball against. They did little to relieve its drabness. The view had not been inspiring. By the end of 1934, that was no longer true. Hi, Pearl. By the end of the year, the residents of the East River apartments, looking north, could see giant cranes moving about on the islands like long-necked dinosaurs prowling far-off marshes. Around the cranes were stirring masses of men. Over the water came the pound of pile drivers, a sound that was dull and far away, but that never seemed to stop. And rising from behind the little buildings on the left of Ward's Island and curving off to the right across this island in a gigantic curve, a highway was being bolted into place in the sky. The highway, carried across Ward's Island on the piers, climbed in a long, slow, powerful line. Across the river, to the right as the watchers looked north, they could see its steel roadbed slanting unhurriedly down behind the first line of factories. There was a great gap in the center, but it took little imagination to see how the roadbed would continue to rise there until it was flung across the Hell Gates, for the hulking concrete anchorages that would hold the cables for the Hell Gate suspension bridge were already in place. Quote, "Immense they are," wrote an observer. "Beside the Nile, they would look pass for pyramids." And so were the bridge's steel towers, which loomed over the river like the facades of twin cathedrals. And even as the watchers watched, new portions of the roadbed paraded past them. Pushing aside the sullen gray of the East River would come a squad of barges lashed together side by side to bear a weight measured in thousands of tons and pushed along by a whole convoy of panting tugboats, bearing to the waiting cranes the specially fabricated steel girders that would hold the bridge roadbed girders, some of which were as big as 10-room ranch house, as big as a 10-room ranch house. I wonder if Robert Moses had any pets. I wonder if he would like Pearl. I think so. You're in my way, Pearl. Enormous as the Triborough Bridge seemed to watchers along the East River, moreover, they were seeing only a small portion of the whole project. And here, look, she's reading. Engineers and journalists felt that it was only from a plane that one could get a feel of the project in its three-borough entirety. From the air, one journalist said, "You can see the avenues being widened, as if a giant chisel was being rammed between them." And from the air, more than one journalist said, the project seemed almost too big to grasp. Robert Moses erected the complex of buildings that was the Central Park Zoo, at least partly because of his devotion to Alfred E. Smith. He tore down another building in the park wholly because of that devotion. It was Jimmy Walker's Casino. Remember the Central Park Casino from a few chapters ago? And Jimmy Walker is the most corrupt mayor that we've talked about so far. He did all his meetings in the casino. They didn't actually do betting. It was called casino because it's an Italian word, but it was just like a fancy schmancy restaurant. Everyone who was interested in the cause of parks in New York City disapproved of the use to which Calvert Vaux, V-A-U-X, his ladies' refreshment salon was being put, of course. But none of them wanted the building torn down. As a structure designed by one of the creators of Central Park, it held a special place in the city's history. And for many of the reformers, it was associated with pleasant memories. They could remember accompanying their parents on a Sunday bicycle or horseback ride through the park that ended with lunch there in the quieter days before the World War. Moreover, the building possessed a Victorian charm precious in its own right. As a practical matter, although Solomon and his backers had poured almost $400,000 into improvements in the building's interior, that was in a previous. Solomon was one of the Central Park Casino owner renovator guys. He was nonetheless only renting it from the city. The city still owned it. The park department could ask him to lower his prices and thereby make the magnificent dining rooms and pavilions more accessible to the general public. If Solomon refused, the city could attempt to cancel his lease and install in its place a more amenable concessionaire. And even if the attempt failed, the lease had only 5 more years to run. After that, the building and the improvements would reverse to the city forever. The Park Association had been campaigning for the casino's conversion into a moderate-priced restaurant, but when the association members heard that Moses was planning to raise the building, announcing that it was structurally unsound, that it would cost too much to repair, and that luxury restaurants had no place in parks anyway, he said that a playground, complete with wading pool, would be constructed in its site, and they were aghast. Such an act, they said, would be wanton destruction. Financially, it made even less sense. A group of restaurant owners had already asked for permission to operate the casino as a moderate-priced restaurant, abiding by any rules that Moses wished to establish, and pay the city $25,000 annual rental, plus a liberal share of the receipts. And finally, as the casino's chief, Henry Charpentier, put it in a plaintive letter to the Times, "Why choose the site of the casino when there are broad expanses as far as the eye can see on either side of the casino, where as fine a swimming pool as the commissioner's kind heart urges him to provide could easily be located?" But Moses refused to compromise. The considerations which motivated him were not historical, aesthetic, or financial. To a large extent, they were hardly rational. It was a case of revenge, pure and simple, says Paul Windells, LaGuardia's corporation counsel, who advised Moses on the case before turning it over in disgust to Assistant Corporation Counsel William C. Chandler. He never said so straight out, but everyone around him knew why he was doing it. He wanted to get back at Walker for what Walker had done to Governor Smith. God, he wanted to get Walker. And the oddest part about the affair, Windell said, was that, to the best of my knowledge, Moses never spoke to Governor Smith about it. And if he had, Governor Smith would have told him not to do it. Solomon, panicking over his investments, offered to confer with Moses and revise his price list. I am not going to confer with Mr. Solomon, Moses replied. With LaGuardia, advised by Windells against supporting an establishment as notorious as the Central Park Casino, refusing to intervene, Chandler served Solomon with an eviction notice that charged the casino corporation with a number of technical violations of its lease. A typical charge was that by allowing fashion shows to be held there, the casino had violated a regulation prohibiting advertising on park property. Solomon took the case to court. The trial turned out to be embarrassing for both him and Moses. If you're just coming in, Moses, pretty much all that's happened is that Moses had just, he's trying to tear down the Central Park Casino, not because the building is actually structurally unsound, but just because he's so loyal to Al Smith, and Al Smith hates Jimmy Walker, and Jimmy Walker loves the casino. So it's like a weird rivalry, loyalty, stubborn thing. Solomon was forced to admit that during the 5 years of its existence, the casino had grossed more than $3 million, and he himself had drawn more than $250,000 in salary while paying the city a total of $42,500 in rent. He had to admit that park department officials had been allowed to consume tens of thousands of dollars of free food and liquor. And he had to manage to keep a straight face while maintaining under cross-examination that he couldn't remember the name of a single one of those officials or of a single one of the casino's stockholders. But Moses had some bad moments on the stand too. Also, I don't. I feel like I have to explain this mug for Raytheon. Raytheon like makes weapons. I don't like war or weapons. I don't know. I don't work at Raytheon. I don't know if I would, but I just have the mug because I think it's kind of. I think the fact that like a government contractor like Raytheon made a mug being like small diameter bomb, I thought it was a little bit funny. So I got it from a thrift store. But now I feel like I need to clarify that I frequently dislike violence, even though I understand that sometimes it accomplishes a greater good. Oh no, you've been influenced? Well, just so you know, I don't think that droning is great. Drone bombs. Okay, sorry, this is totally beside the point, but so like for the US government, a lot of the drones are remotely operated by people in the States. So they send the drones, they bomb people, often innocent people. It's really sad. The people that are operating the drones, though, are dudes. And one of the biggest places for drone operation is like right outside of Las Vegas. And there's something so depraved to me about the idea of like, okay, time to go to work. And then you kill a bunch of people. And then you drive home and you're in Vegas. And you like look out at like just like the gaudiness of the Bellagio and the Strip. It just feels like one of the worst lives you could even have as an American, like bombing people in the Middle East and then coming home and gambling on the Strip. Anyway, though, sorry, if you like gambling on the Strip, that's totally fine. I just, I think if people do it a lot, there can't be much good that comes out of it. I went one time and it kind of freaked me out, but I think if I go again, I'm gonna I think I'm going to make myself play blackjack or Texas Hold'em at the tables, because then you can at least make friends. I think the slot machines are a little depressing. Yeah, I'm anti-gambling in general. But then when people say like, "Oh, but it's so fun," and so like you're paying to have a good time and you're paying for other aspects, then it's like, okay, fine, I can get on board with that. The idea of like going out and spending $50 for the sake of a good time, I'm like, okay, I've done that, many times at restaurants or whatever. But also it's okay, also it was really hard with the tables because I'm just not amazing at the games. Like I'm not amazing enough to want to invest more than like 30, 40, $50, but you have to usually do a minimum of like way more than that. Some of them were like $200 to start, and I didn't want to do that. Yeah, the slot machines were really there's a really good documentary by what's his name? He's the BBC guy. He's like the same guy as My Money Don't Jiggle Jiggle. How am I blanking on his name? He did the those like hour-long documentaries for the BBC around like 2000, 2001, 2, 3-ish. And there was one about the Vegas regulars, and it was really incredible. There was this woman who was a medical doctor, but she was old. She was retired, and she spent all her time gambling, and she had for years, for almost a decade. And she had said she had lost like millions of dollars, and it was really disturbing. His name isn't Justin Trudeau, but it reminds me kind of it. Who is the guy? Who's that documentary guy? I'll think of it later. Yes, slot machines are just so dystopian. Also, I think that if there was a little bit of strategy involved in the slots, then I could understand a little bit more why people would get into it if you think that you can game it or win. But it's just usually there's either no or very little strategy. And so I was like, I don't even know how fun that could even be. Anyway, Moses had some bad. Sorry to anyone watching who had to watch my aside about gambling. But I think I could get on board with poker. That seems like fun because you make friends at your table. One was reminiscent of the way he had been. Okay, Moses had bad moments on the stand too. One was reminiscent of the way he had been trapped in an apparent lie the only other time he had found himself under oath. In the Taylor estate trial, he had testified that he had never been advised that appropriation without funds was illegal. And W. Kingsland Macy's attorney, Charles H. Tuttle, had thereupon produced the paper which had given him that very advice and waved it in front of him. Now, sitting in the witness chair in State Supreme Court in Foley Square, Moses said that he would allow in city parks only restaurants that charged reasonable prices. And when pressed for his definition of reasonable, he said that a luncheon should be $1 or less, coffee no more than a dime, and that the a la carte system is a luxury which should not be permitted to exist in a park restaurant. Whereupon, Solomon's attorney, the same Charles H. Tuttle, that is so interesting, produced a paper, waved it in front of Moses, and asked if he recognized it. It was the luncheon menu approved by Moses from the Tavern on the Green, the restaurant Moses had installed in the sheepfold after renovating it and turning it over to a favorite concessionaire for a nominal rental. And the attorney read from it a long list of a la carte entrees for luncheon, all priced over $1, and concluded by reading the tavern's price for coffee, 25 cents. The press, which had long used the casino as a convenient symbol of the abuses of the corrupt Walkerian court, treated the trial as an attempt to end those abuses. If there was a principle involved, the press ignored it, but some reformers did not. The casino case marked the first significant defections from the solid ranks the city's good government movement had previously formed behind Moses in every encounter. Not all reformers disapproved of his attempt to demolish the building, of course. Moses still believed that anything he did was right. Most still believed that anything Moses did was right. Apparently, judging from their comments, because they believed his motives were pure. When he said the building was structurally unsound and repairs were unfeasible, they believed him. And most of those who, having seen the casino, found his contention difficult to believe, felt sure that he had simply made a mistake, one to which, in view of his past record, he was more than entitled. But to some reformers, and among them some of the men and women who had played the most vital roles in persuading the legislature to allow Moses to assume the city park commissionership, they found it difficult to reconcile their idealized image of him with the fact that he was now contemplating destroying property in Central Park, which did not belong to him, but to the entire city. And they were certain, they said, that he did not have the power to do so. But this last group of reformers was in for an awakening, the same kind of awakening that had been undergone 10 years before by Truby Davison, who had introduced a bill Moses had drafted without thoroughly studying it, and by upstate reformers like Ansley Wilcox and Alphonse Clearwater, who had been tricked by Moses into supporting the Davison bill. In outlining the powers of the New York City Park Commissioner, as in outlining the powers of the chairman of the State Council of Parks, Moses had proved again that he was the best bill drafter in Albany. The city reformers had supported the bill that had allowed Moses to become commissioner, despite reservations about some of its broader provisions. Now, they looked at the bill more closely and found that it was not only its broader provisions that they should have been worried about. Chandler startled them by arguing in court that the bill granted the city park commissioner absolute power to raise or remove buildings which had been erected as incidental to park uses, such as restaurants and boathouses and similar structures. And that it further provided, as additional insurance against any check on his actions, that such charges will not be supervised by the judicial power unless palpably abusive of the grant. The inclusion of such language in the bill, they realized, meant that not even the courts could stop Moses from tearing down any structure in the parks that he wanted to tear down. As Truby Davison had done 10 years before, they hurriedly began reading the law, and they found that the language was, buried within a mass of other legalese, indeed in it. Oh, thanks. I'm so glad you liked my lateral episodes. Everyone on that podcast is really smart and amazing, and so I was a little nervous. I was intimidated, but they're also really nice. And this time, the most recent time, my microphone actually worked, so that helped out a lot. The first time I was on it, my mic didn't, and then there were a few comments from people being like, "Hi, this girl's sound is bad." They found that some other language was not in it. Language that had previously been included in city park laws at their request to ensure against willful changes in the parks at the whim of a park commissioner. Under the old statute, the approval of a landscape architect, skilled and expert, had been required for any major alteration in a park. Now, there was no longer any such requirement. Moses had skillfully amended it out of the new law. Chandler said in court that the new law gave Moses the right to do whatever he wanted in parks as long as it was for a proper park use, and that Moses was the only man who could determine what was and was not a proper use. And Chandler was right. As the reformers read the law that they helped pass, they realized that they had helped turn over the parks that were the priceless heritage of the city to the whim of one man. Pearl's having so much, wait, I should show you. She's like freaking out. She's playing with this little like piece of, I think it's a styrofoam packing peanut. Oh no, it's like I don't even know what this is. It's tape. Anyway, she's been like running through the apartment just like a crazy lady. I think I'm going to read one more page and then it'll be the end of the chapter. Before the issue was finally decided, a number of requests for injunctions against the demolition were argued before several different Supreme Court justices. One, John F. Carew, Carew, allowed his emotions to boil over on the bench. Moses' contention that the casino was in an irreparably bad state of disrepair, Carew said, was obviously preposterous and contrary to the facts. Having thus called Moses a liar in legalese, Carew went on. Also, I'm just going to Google because I can't remember. I think this is a state Supreme Court case. John F. Carew. Let's see. It's probably a state Supreme Court case, not a national Supreme Court, right? I just looked up John F. Carew, who is supposedly a Supreme Court justice, and oh yeah, okay, sure enough, John F. Carew on Wikipedia, he gets his entire biography is like fairly thorough, but it only gets 45 page views a month, which is very low. Okay, anyway. The casino, he said, has long been an honorable, useful, beloved, admired, valuable, and even historic monument. The park commissioner has no more power to destroy the casino than he had to destroy the obelisk, to fill in the reservoir, or the lake, to tear down City Hall, the arsenal, or the many historic buildings, monuments, structures, statues in the many other parks of the city, the treasured relics of generations here. He is only to hold office for a brief term. He is the passing creature of a day. He will, in time, and not that long, be superseded. He may not waste the heritage of New York. In the meantime, he must restrain his extravagant, excessive energy and zeal, or he must be restrained. He issued the injunction. But Moses wasn't worried. He knew what was in the law. I think the higher court will take care of Justice Carew, he told a reporter airily, and he was right. When Chandler appealed Carew's decision to the Appellate Division in Albany, the 5 justices of that court, sitting together in their high-backed chairs, said that the powers the legislature had granted to Moses were far too broad and indicted, that they wished the legislature would revoke some of them. But for the present, they said, the law was passed, and it was unfortunately clear. They had no choice but to overrule Carew's decision. If Moses had the power to destroy the casino, Carew had said, he had the power to destroy the obelisk, the arsenal, City Hall, or any other structure, no matter how historic, no matter how beautiful, no matter how treasured, in any park in New York City. Carew was wrong about City Hall. It lies just outside the northern boundary of City Hall Park. Moses couldn't tear it down. But Carew was right about everything else. Moving quickly to forestall any further appeals, Moses had crews of workmen tearing down the casino within 24 hours after he received a copy of the appellate court decision. Within 2 months, the building was gone and its site was covered with a playground. Except for its stained glass windows, which were used in the new police station being constructed on the 86th Street Transverse Road, Robert Moses had succeeded in eradicating every trace of the spiritual home of the man who had publicly humiliated Alfred E. Smith. End of the chapter. I'm going to stop here, but the next chapter is 21, The Candidate. And I'm just going to read the first sentence because it's really juicy and exciting. There had been a day in 1934 on which the cheering had stopped. It was the day Robert Moses started running for governor. So that's what's going to happen tomorrow. So curious to see how that's going to go. And oh wow, 40% done. Look at me. I already purchased, well, I'm not going to read this right away because it's the third book, but I was at a thrift store and they had the Lyndon Johnson Master of the Senate book. And I did buy it because I was like, you know what? I'll probably read this eventually. And it's also by Robert Caro. Okay, See you later. Have a good day.